Just a few days ago, I released my non-spoiler video for the Talos Principle. Please watch that one first, because this video might otherwise ruin one of the best experiences from a game that I've ever had. For the first few hours, I was quite content completing puzzles and being congratulated by a godly voice in the sky. The game's a few years old now, but those environments are still beautiful. It felt like some wonderful dreamland, and as empty as I knew those locations were, I still enjoyed venturing through them, puzzle after puzzle. I was pleasantly surprised when the weather changed, and again when the theme transitioned from ancient Greek, Roman to something else. But the thing that eventually made this game special to me was what I disliked the most about it early on. I initially treated those beeping computer terminals like they were books in Skyrim. That is to say, I ignored them and skipped through the dialogue. In true Philip fashion, I spent all of a few seconds picking my responses, thinking nothing more of it until the computer terminal started using what I had previously said against me, highlighting the contradictions in my arguments and generally making me feel really inadequate. At this point, I suspected the game might be about religion versus science. The godly voice would lovingly tell me to do things, but refuse to answer anything, while the computers were cold and calculating, making me question everything in a brutal, logical fashion. I felt like the game was manipulating me, forcing me to pick a side. Regardless of what my beliefs might be, I didn't like being dissected about it, especially to something I had previously passed off as nothing more than a Skyrim book, and especially not by something that kept proving me wrong. As an example, early on the computer asks me if a string of tin cans could be conscious. I say no, but then he asks me if a computer could, provided it could accurately simulate a brain, and I'm like, yeah, why not? And then he asks me to say what the difference is between a computer and a string of tin cans. I could have continued to argue semantics, but I knew already that my defense had been broken. My argument? Flawed. You know where this is going. I fell into its traps time and time again. This was no longer about my beliefs. This was about scoring points off that damned computer terminal. I hadn't had such heated debate since I argued with myself last week. Being the YouTube comment warrior that I am, I couldn't help but get sucked into those discussions. I wanted so badly to beat that computer at its own game, but our sessions were short and time again, the computer would say goodbye and I would be forced to progress further with the puzzles before our next debate could begin.
All across this land, I have created trials for you to overcome.
Back to the puzzles and that friendly voice congratulating me. Aside from his religious mumbo-jumbo and fixation on puzzle solving, he seemed like a nice guy. I didn't want to distrust him. I didn't want to betray him. And yet I was finding him increasingly boring, and those computer terminals increasingly engaging. The turning point comes when you discover the tower. This monstrous looming structure, its top hidden in the clouds, sits in the very centre of the world, and that godly voice, whose voice is normally so polite and encouraging, suddenly changes as he tells you never to climb the tower. I can do anything I like, but that one thing. And of course he doesn't explain why.
You must not ascend the great tower, for it shall bring death and the end of your generations.
Well, okay, I guess that's a pretty firm answer. But come on, you can't just say that without explaining why it will or how. Without the juicy details, it makes me just want to climb it all the more. It's human nature. If I wanted to spoil this game, I'd have googled it there and then to figure out whether I should climb that tower. And in your shoes, I'd keep watching this video. But I did the right thing. I stuck to the game, adamant that I'd find out for myself. Now, I wasn't just waiting for my next computer argument. I was also searching for any clue to the tower, and whether or not I should climb it. It remains locked until most of the puzzles are completed, so I have plenty of time to ponder. And my mind began to race. I tried to second guess the developers' intentions. Were they atheists, using the game to convince me to betray a godly figure? Or were they religious, using the tower to represent a forbidden fruit in the Garden of Eden? In which case, the tower was a trap, and I'd be a fool for climbing it. I don't care whether you're religious or not, a game that forces you to choose feels like it's manipulating you. And it's not a nice feeling, but I couldn't help but continue, for the computer debates, for answers about the tower, and, now, to learn the developers' intentions. The puzzles are lonely, the worlds are lonely. There are notes scribbled on the walls throughout the game from many of the previous inhabitants. They all possess their own personalities and attitudes. Some are rather crazy, some are desperate. One whom I had grown to respect was Shepard. He possessed excellent puzzle-solving abilities, as well as a very intelligent, reassuring tone. He was like my Shepard, saying that he would do his best to help those who came after him. I followed in his footsteps, but somewhere he had gotten trapped and realised that he could go no further. But these people had long left these lands, which are now empty, and didn't I know it. Occasionally, you uncover voice clips from a person called Alex. In these recordings, she talks about humanity, morality, and what is left behind after you die. What about after all of mankind dies? Is it possible to continue our legacy? What is important to preserve? And even if any of this matters. At the time, I thought these were pretentious, but listening back to them now, I appreciate how wonderfully they explain everything. Closely tied to the feeling of being alone is the concept of time. When did Alex record these clips? Weeks ago? Could have been years. Could have been millennia. It made me feel like there was more to this world than met the eye, as though it had a long and exciting past that was left to me to piece together. But while these remnants are left behind, you don't interact with other NPCs. One of the later puzzle tricks is to record yourself to help future you to solve puzzles, but this only made me feel lonelier as I watched my past self rushing about the maps behind me in a predictable and pre-planned route. And perhaps because of all this, I wanted to trust that godly voice. I really did. He seemed like the one friendly entity in the game, and yet he never gave me any answers. Why wouldn't he tell me? And I began to ignore him, spending more of my time actively seeking out and interacting with the computer. Even if it was a bit of a dick. At times even a huge dick, who took great delight in telling me that I was an idiot. It ended up feeling like an abusive relationship, but at least it gave me the chance to reply, and warranted what I said with a well thought out response. At least it had some degree of depth to it, rather than the god who began to sound like a broken record by the end of the game. A friendly, but broken record. And it was perhaps because the computer was such a dick that it meant so much when it wasn't. We had argued and debated, I had my guard up, and then, out of nowhere, it asked me if I'd come back to talk to it again, or if it could come with me when I eventually moved on. Was this sentiment? Just for a moment, it hinted that there was more to it than cold, calculating logic, and I found myself unexpectedly moved by that. I am a sentimental person, especially for inanimate objects. Their lack of humanity leaves more room for me to sympathise with them. I grew up feeling sorry for uneaten food on a plate, as though I had somehow let it down. I've even felt sorry for a starfish who, as an unwanted catch, was dumped on the beach by a fishing boat and left to die at the beaks of seagulls. We took pity on it and put it back in the water. This pleading tone really got to me. And likewise, I grew to care more for the robots in this game than I have with living creatures in other ones. So maybe it's not coincidence that one of the most human video game interactions I've ever had comes from a robot. Even if it's an evil eye with a hard-on for arguments, I couldn't hate it. Its pathetic bleeps, the fact I voluntarily chose to respond to it. I couldn't leave it alone by the end. Just look at it. Poor thing. I ended up getting quite emotional about it all, seeing those computer terminals as things just as lonely and as lost as I was. Those last few puzzles were bittersweet. They were a test for my abilities. I should have enjoyed them, yet I felt like the end was nigh. A big decision was approaching, and I might never return to these places again. It was like I was about to say goodbye to an old friend, and I found myself just standing on the edge of the worlds, staring out at the mountains and appreciating the game's awesome soundtrack. And it is brilliant. Flicking through the game's music list, there's not a single track that doesn't transport me back to those beautiful, dreamy worlds. The later voice clips from Alex moved from the bigger picture of humanity to the much more personal as she talks about her friend's death, the significance of her own life, then towards the end of the game, her own impending death. Her audio recordings depicted what it was to be alive and aware of your existence, and how it's shaped by the finality of death. She covered topics we've all thought about, it's just that she had the difficult job of explaining them all in words. My conversations with the computer terminals then took an unexpected turn. It was back to its old, argumentative ways, but I had changed. Perhaps I had grown wiser. The computer terminal's logic was impeccable, but it was bound to it. I couldn't explain some of my decisions or beliefs because, to this computer, they seemed irrational. That to justify some things in life, you just need a bit of faith. And look at this! Whereas I started off barely glancing over the text, here I am, reading through it several times and actually thinking about which answer I was going to go with. That's amazing! Not in my 500 hours in Skyrim have I ever done that. Not once. And it felt like the game respected me for doing it. I was expecting the computer terminal to deliver some 4D Ultra Mensa rebuttal to my responses. But slowly and surely, the computer terminal began to crumble, began to falter. It might think it knows all of the answers, but it doesn't believe in anything. Why is it even bothering to argue such an empty existence? And I honestly agree. This isn't about discussing religion or an afterlife anymore. This is about this life and what purpose your existence has. You can see it all as pointless, or about like how if you zoom out enough, you become worthless and your actions meaningless. Or maybe you put your faith in some kind of afterlife to sort it all out. But doing so doesn't make you smart or profound. What's far better, far more rewarding, and far harder is to give this life meaning. And that does often require a little bit of faith. And when presented with this, the computer terminal broke. It couldn't compute. It became a child throwing a tantrum in the only ways it knew how. Eventually I got the better of it. It began tripping over its own arguments and it got agitated and angry with me. Eventually I won, and the computer terminal ceased the debate. It wasn't like your traditional boss battle, but I felt I had accomplished more from defeating that computer terminal than I do from beating most games. Indeed, some things just needed a bit of faith, or at least a fair bit of curiosity. So I headed to the tower. God had always been friendly, but I needed more than that. I needed answers, and one way or another, I felt I'd get them from the top. I ignored his advice and started my climb. All of my puzzle-solving abilities were put to the test through a number of rooms that broke the conventional methods that the game had previously thrown at me. I had to think outside the box in new and often literal ways, and to relearn the rules with which I was playing this game. I had transcended beyond the game's confines, I had beaten the computer at its own game, and now was going against God. And the stories of everybody I had been following reached their conclusions too. Other robots spoke of how they had gotten trapped, unable to progress any further, and the voice clips from Alex grew increasingly desperate as she became ill. She knew her time was up, and wondered if her life had all been for nothing. She noted her concerns about the simulation and whether it was so flawed that it was unable to fulfill its purpose. It was sad that she would never know if her life's work had been a success, or if she had squandered a life that could have been spent with friends and family. I still didn't know how long she had been gone for, but maybe that didn't matter anymore. I was absolutely enthralled by this game at this point. How could I not push on further to see where it was all leading to? Eventually I beat the puzzles and reached the clouds.
What have you done? Why have you ascended the tower? Why have you betrayed my faith in you? Turn back! I command you!
Yeah, it's a bit late for that. I pushed on through the clouds, eventually emerging at one giant final puzzle, where, among others, I found Shepard, the one who had written so many words of advice and guidance throughout my journey. He was a robot just like me, and this was as far as he had gotten. Now it was my turn to help him, and I freed him from his box, and we set off together to end whatever this was. As God continued to plead with us, the simulation below started to collapse, consumed by a violent storm that had erupted in the clouds below. The only way to go now was up. We took in turns to solve puzzles and to carry out actions which would let the other reach further, all performed like a dance between expert puzzle solvers.
This world is our home.
After having spent the game alone, it was emotional to finally have a friend, and for them to set everything aside, selflessly heading off down a path of self-destruction simply to help me to escape this place. More was said through those silent actions than through any amount of dialogue. I can just say I greatly appreciated that time I spent working with them towards a united goal. The music, which had been a huge part of this game all the way through for me, reached dramatic new levels as the storm picked up and started consuming lower bits of this puzzle, the robots whom I had left behind. The storm was raging on beneath, the voice of God roaring down from above, and in between were robots working together in silent harmony to break free of this place as we reached higher and higher into the sky. God grew desperate, pleading with me to listen, but I had chosen my path. Eventually we reached the top, and Shepard remained as brilliant as he always had been, as he set the stage for me to escape. He could go no further, and we parted ways as I left him there.
Please, stay here. Let the story go on forever.
Then, silence. Everything turned white, and all was explained. Mankind had been wiped out by a deadly virus. People like Alex had spent their final years constructing this place in the hope that it would one day spawn life of its own. The Talos Principle had been one big Turing test of sorts. Countless robots had gone before me, and they had failed along the way. But sometime before my own adventure, some of these robots had begun to develop more human traits. Robots like Shepard, but ultimately, I had been the first to be deemed worthy. I contained a soul or consciousness, whatever was required to enable humanity to live on through me. Alex had had so many concerns that her project might never succeed, but I was proof that it had. God's voice boomed out, but he wasn't angry with me.
You were always meant to defy me. That was the final trial. But I was scared. I wanted to live forever.
I arrived at one final golden computer terminal. At first it acted like it didn't know me. But then he admitted that he was done with my shit. He was rude, blunt and abrupt, but I didn't mind anymore. I'd grown quite fond of him. Our experiences, our twisted outlook on this world, we rarely ever agreed about anything, but we had grown to know each other through long philosophical debates and disputes, through intellectual battle about everything from the meaning of it all down to the very fabric of humanity. So I felt it fitting to end it all by telling him to get bent. And like that, I transcended. My consciousness broke free of this computer simulation, and the digital world I had been through began to shut down. And then I emerged to a new world, devoid of humans, but through me, humanity would live on. Croteam did a spectacular job with the Talos Principle. It's a tale of what might be required of a system that preserves humanity, and what that might entail. And while it can be seen as philosophical and pretentious, it also tells very real stories that I got utterly engrossed in, to an extent that few games have matched. If you ever need proof that the value of a game can be measured by something other than playtime, take it from me. In a dozen hours, the Talos Principle left more of an impression on me than many games I've spent considerably longer playing. A lot of gaming experiences blend together in my mind, but the Talos Principle stands out in a vivid colour, as a strong, unique blend of music, scenery and story. I'm taking a risk sharing my experiences with it with you, because you might not have the same experience with it as I did. In fact, I know you won't, because on my playthrough I misinterpreted a few things. A lot of the information the game can tell you requires you to seek it out. I only covered a small fraction of what it has to offer, and I didn't read through and memorise every snippet of information it gave me. Having looked it up since, there are aspects of the story that I misinterpreted, but I have told you about it in this video as I perceived it on my first playthrough. And it begs the question, if my experience meant so much to me, do my misinterpretations even matter? Isn't it even more reason for me to explain my experience of it to you? Aside from to get some footage for this video, I haven't returned to the game since I finished it. I wish to preserve the memories I have of it, undiluted from a second playthrough. Now it's over, I reminisce about my time in those worlds with the same nostalgia I feel for a good dream. But this game is not a dream. You can play the Talos Principle for yourself. You can relive the same puzzles, worlds and story as I did. But that doesn't mean you'll experience what I did. To help you to understand that, I felt it was important that I made this video. While the Talos Principle attempts to digitally preserve humanity, this YouTube video hopes to digitally preserve my experience of playing it. I hope that through these audio recordings, I can convey what made it more than just the sum of its parts to me. My interpretations may be flawed, my descriptions limited, but hopefully it's still enough to preserve the soul of it, in a format that's no longer bound by my own existence. Thank Elohim for YouTube.